Hello, I'm Greg Scott from Greenfields Business Advisory, and welcome to Module 3 of our series in occupational health and safety. So before we get started, just a reminder that this is not to be taken as legal advice. It's really an overview on the various components of occupational health and safety. Just to recap Module 2. In Module 2, we learnt that a company needs a framework on which to build capability to effectively manage occupational health and safety. We identified many of the components that make up a safety framework. We need to develop a framework so that the organisation can meet its obligations. And we need to train staff and record that training, along with actions, observations, incidents, improvements, meetings, etc. So for Module 3, we're going to talk about eliminating or minimising risks. So let's get started. As an employer, you have a duty under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to eliminate risks to health and safety, so far as is reasonably practicable. If it's not reasonably practicable to eliminate risks to health and safety, you must reduce those risks. So what's the difference between a hazard and a risk? A hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, whereas the risk is the probability that a hazard will cause harm. In our example here, a shark in the ocean is a hazard. The risk is hopping in and swimming with the shark. So how do we eliminate or reduce risks? Well, we conduct a hazard analysis and develop a form to assist us do that. We'll investigate hazards, and it's good to do that in a team. We calculate the risk of harm, and we put in place solutions to minimise that risk. So we have some tools to help us do this. One is the hierarchy of controls. In minimising or eliminating risks, the hierarchy of control is a system for controlling risks in the workplace. The hierarchy of control is a step-by-step approach to eliminating or reducing risk, and it ranks risk controls from the highest level of protection and reliability through to the lowest and least reliable protection. You can conduct a review of all tasks in the business to implement the hierarchy of controls. Risk may involve introducing a single risk control or a combination of two or more different controls. For example, protecting employees and others from flying debris when using a concrete cutting saw may involve isolating the work area, guarding the saw blade, and using PPE such as face shields. So in our hierarchy of controls, for example, we can have elimination. Elimination may be the most effective. The best way to eliminate a hazard is to not introduce the hazard in the first place. For example, you can eliminate the risk of a fall from a height by doing the work at ground level. With substitution, for example, we can replace the hazard. An example would be use a scourer, mild detergent and hot water instead of caustic cleaners for cleaning. Use a cordless drill instead of an electric drill if the power cord is in danger of being cut. Or use water-based paints instead of solvent-based paints. Engineering controls to help isolate people from the hazard. Examples might be mechanical devices such as trolleys or hoists to move heavy loads, guards around moving parts of machinery, pedestrian sensing systems, or even speed governing mechanisms. Administrative controls to change the way people work can also help. Examples could be developing procedures on how to operate machinery safely, limiting exposure time to a hazardous task, or using signs to warn people of a hazard. A good example in COVID-19 is working from home, for example. Can also protect the worker with the use of personal protective equipment. Examples are earmuffs, earplugs, goggles, respirators, face mask, hard hat, all sorts of things, safety harnesses, gloves, etc. Again, just a reminder, as an employer, you have a duty under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to eliminate risks. If you can't, as reasonably practicable, eliminate them, you must reduce those risks. So a tool to help us identify those risks is called a risk matrix. A risk matrix is a tool that can be used to identify the severity and likelihood of a potential risk. And it's used when completing a hazard analysis. Here's an example. You may have a form which identifies an activity you may be looking at, hazards that may be involved, the risk score before you take the controls, what the hierarchy of controls may be, the risk score after the controls are put in place, what those measures are, and who's responsible. In an example here, we may be able to identify an activity such as welding to manufacturing machinery. Under the hazards, we can identify that the hazards may be fire, burns, or eye flashes. If we look under fire, we've identified that the risk score matrix is 7. We come to that because a fire is probably major in terms of the consequence, and it's possible if we're welding. That gives us a score of 7 in red in the risk matrix. The hierarchy of control we're going to apply in this case is EC, which is engineering control. And after implementing that control, we find our risk is down to 4. The risk control measure is reduce fire risk by having a fire extinguisher nearby. And who's responsible? The employee in this case. In burns, for example, we identify that 6 would be something like a moderate burn, and it's possible, which should be a 6. By using PPE as a risk control or hierarchy of control measure, we can reduce the risk of burn. So that may come down to 4, which is possibly minor or unlikely, or insignificant, or possible. And would you reduce risk by using protective clothing? It could be overalls, leather weld jacket, or welding gloves. In this case, the employee's got to use those. We've also identified eye flashes. So, for example, 7. It could be moderate or likely. We'll use PPE. And also some engineering controls. The risk score after that is 3 in this case. So reduce eye flashing risk by using suitable welding masks. The engineering controls may be things like mobile welding curtains to reduce flashing for other employees that might be in the area. And the responsibility is the employee to go and make sure those things are put in place. So once we've done the hazard analysis and we've done the review, we need to take some action again. We need to develop work instructions, safe work method statements, job safety analysis, etc. We need to train staff and make sure they know what's involved. That could be in the form of toolbox talks, could be in the form of training. We need to put in place some action control measures. It could be some engineering, change chemicals instead of others, using protective equipment. And we need to measure and improve the way we go about it. So review effectiveness of those swims and instructions, etc., and improve them if they're needed. Okay, when to conduct a hazard or risk process. Managing workplace risk is an ongoing process that needs attention over time, but particularly when any changes affect work activities. You should work through risk management process steps when starting a new business, for example, expanding or purchasing an existing business, designing and planning products, processes, or places used for work, changing work practices, procedures, or a work environment, changing organizational structure or job roles, introducing new workers or returning workers to the workplace, purchasing new or used equipment or using new substances, working with a new supplier or new commissioner of your services, planning to improve productivity or reduce costs, if new information about the workplace risk becomes available, and responding to workplace incidences if they have caused no injury. Responding to concerns raised by workers, health and safety representatives, or others of the workplace, or required by workplace regulations or specific hazards. That concludes the third module. Here's what we learned in module 3. An understanding of hazards and risks in our obligations, We explored the hierarchy of control systems. We identified a tool to assist in analysing and reducing risks to harm. And we looked at how and when we can use the hierarchy of control and risk matrix to eliminate or reduce the risks to harm. So thanks for joining me on Module 3. That concludes the third module. Join me in Module 4, where we can explore how we take all the information we've learned in Module 1, 2, and 3 and apply it in working with your customers. Thank you.